Don't talk to her. She's just the help." Those were the words my daughter-in-law said to the hotel receptionist while I was standing right there. And my son? He laughed. Imagine that. Your own child laughing while someone calls you worthless. After a lifetime of love, of sacrifice, of holding everything together. In that moment, I felt invisible. Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back. Tonight's story isn't about revenge. It's about awakening. It's about a woman who gave everything, her time, her dreams, her heart, only to discover that sometimes the people you love most can make you forget your own worth. But it's also a story of strength, the kind that rises quietly after being pushed down for too long. A story that reminds us, no matter how old you are, it's never too late to stand tall again. If you've ever been overlooked, hurt, or made to feel small, please stay with me until the end. And before we begin, if you believe in stories that touch the heart and heal the soul, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories find the people who need them most. Now, let's begin. It was supposed to be a lovely family holiday. My son Evan had suggested we all go away for a week to the coast. Him, his wife Bianca, the 2 children, and me. He said I needed a bit of sea air. And for once, I felt hopeful. It had been years since we'd done anything together. So, I packed my small suitcase, ironed my best summer dress, and spent the 4-hour drive imagining sandcastles, laughter, and maybe even a proper conversation with my grandchildren. But the car ride said everything. Bianca chatted endlessly about spa treatments, the Michelin-starred restaurant she'd booked, and her new summer wardrobe. Evan nodded along, throwing in the odd laugh. I sat quietly in the back, hands folded in my lap, staring out of the window. Each time I tried to join in. "I heard there's a lovely market nearby." Bianca's reply was polite but clipped. "Oh, we'll see if we've time, won't we, Evan?" Then she turned back to her phone. By the time we pulled into the hotel car park, the air felt heavy. Silver Coast Resort. I knew every inch of that place. I'd built it from the ground up 2 decades ago, though no one in that car had the faintest idea. To them, I was just Mom, tagging along, taking up space. Still, seeing the glass-fronted entrance, the tall palms swaying against the blue sky, I felt a swell of pride. Evan handed the car keys to the valet while Bianca adjusted her sunglasses, a designer pair, of course, and stepped out as if she owned the place. "Make sure our bags go straight to the penthouse," she said to the valet without looking at him. Then, glancing back at me, she added, "Come along, Mum. Try not to fall behind." Inside, the marble floors gleamed, and a cool scent of jasmine drifted through the lobby. Behind the front desk stood Lena, the duty manager. She recognized me instantly. Our eyes met for a split second, and she gave a small, knowing nod. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Silver Coast Resort," Lena said warmly. "How may I help you?" "Reservation under Carter," Evan replied, his tone brisk. "We booked the penthouse suite." Lena tapped on her keyboard. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I have your booking here. You're confirmed for the Ocean Deluxe, but I'm afraid the penthouse is fully occupied for the week." Bianca's jaw tightened. "That's not acceptable. I specifically requested it. Do you know who we are?" "I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Carter," Lena said gently, "but all our penthouses are currently taken." Bianca raised her voice. "Then move someone out. I don't care what you have to do. My husband and I deserve the best." Other guests began to glance over. I stepped forward, hoping to calm her. "Bianca, love, perhaps—" She turned on me so sharply I froze. "Don't speak," she hissed. "Honestly, Lena, just ignore her. She's not part of this. She's just the help we brought with us." Silence. The words hung in the air like smoke. A couple standing nearby turned to stare. My cheeks burned. Evan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he said lightly. "Mom, why don't you sit down somewhere while we sort this?" I looked at my son, my only child, and for a moment I didn't recognize him. I nodded quietly and stepped aside, my heart thudding. Around us, people whispered. The manager looked at me with pity. I could have spoken then, ended it all with one sentence, but I didn't. I picked up my small bag, held my head high, and walked towards the lounge, the woman they thought was just the help. Sitting in that hotel lounge, pretending to study the glossy magazines laid out on the table, my mind drifted back to a time when life was a very different picture. Before the marble floors, before the chandeliers, before the name Silver Coast Resort meant anything to anyone. There was just me, a bucket of soapy water, and a dream I was almost too tired to hold on to. I was 39 when my husband passed away. One quiet evening, he went out to fix the neighbor's fence and never came back. A heart attack, they said, sudden, merciless. Evan was only 15 then, all bones and teenage anger, slamming doors because he couldn't make sense of a world that had stolen his dad. I had no savings, no degree in business, not even a car, just a mortgage, a son, and a heart that refused to give up. I started small, a tiny guest house in Brighton, 4 rooms and a leaky roof. I cleaned the bathrooms myself, the smell of detergent and bleach clinging to my skin long after midnight. My hands were cracked, red raw from scrubbing, but I didn't mind. Every morning, I'd open the curtains and whisper, "One day, this will be something more." The guests were kind at first, traveling couples, retired teachers, families with sandy shoes. They'd tell me my breakfast was the best on the coast, or that the bed linen smelled of home. Each compliment was like a coin dropped into the jar of my determination. I poured every penny back into that little place, swapping holidays for secondhand furniture and endless paint tins. There were nights I couldn't sleep, not from worry, but from the sound of the old boiler clanking through the walls. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a mug of instant coffee, working out how many bookings I'd need that month just to keep the lights on. And somehow, bit by bit, I made it work. By the time Evan went off to university, that old guest house had turned into something people started to notice. Then came a second property, a small boutique inn in Cornwall, followed by one in Bath, then another on the Welsh coast. Each one felt like raising another child. I knew every carpet pattern, every staff name, every key that ever turned in those doors. When Silver Coast came up for sale, a run-down seaside hotel barely staying afloat, everyone told me I was mad to buy it. But I saw what it could become. 5 years later, it wasn't just a hotel. It was a home, a living proof that hard work and a bit of stubbornness could turn a widow with nothing into a woman who built something lasting. And yet, there I was that day, sitting quietly while my own family laughed at me in the lobby of the very place I'd created. I never told Evan about my success because I wanted him to grow up believing in effort, not inheritance. I thought he'd love me for who I was, not for what I owned. Maybe that was naive. Maybe I wanted too much. As I sat there watching the guests glide past in their linen clothes and wide smiles, I felt that strange ache of pride mixed with loneliness. I had built homes for strangers all my life, beautiful places where people came to rest and feel safe. But somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten to build a place where I belonged. The next morning, I woke to the sound of laughter coming from the corridor. Bianca's heels clicked like a metronome as she gave out instructions, her voice sharp even through the door. "Evan, the children's swimwear is in the blue case, not the red one. Do I have to do everything myself?" A moment later, she knocked lightly on my door and peeked in. "Morning, Mum," she said with that sugary tone she reserved for waiters she didn't intend to tip. "We're off to the spa this morning. Could you watch the kids for a bit? Just until lunchtime." Before I could reply, she was already halfway down the hall. The bit turned into 6 hours. Zara, 10, and Oliver, 8, had inherited their mother's knack for silence when it came to me. They sat by the pool, each with an iPad, not once looking up. I tried. "Shall we build a sandcastle later, or have an ice cream?" Zara didn't even lift her eyes. "Mum says we shouldn't eat too many sweets, bad for our teeth." Oliver muttered, "Mum says you used to clean houses for rich people. Is that true?" I froze. The words hit harder than I expected. I took a breath. No, love. I ran hotels. I still do. He frowned. Mom said you like to pretend. And that was that. They went back to their screens. I sat beside them, the sun warm on my skin, the sound of waves and laughter echoing all around us. But somehow I felt colder than I'd ever been. Other families played in the water, splashing, shouting, full of life. I watched a grandfather lift his granddaughter high into the air, both of them laughing. For a moment, I imagined Evan and me when he was that age, his little arms wrapped around my neck, his laugh like music. Back then, he'd tell me, "Mom, you're the strongest person in the world." Now he barely looked at me. When they finally returned from the spa, Bianca was glowing, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf, smelling of roses and honey. Evan carried 2 shopping bags, designer labels, of course. "How are the kids?" he asked absently, scrolling through his phone. "Fine," I said quietly. "Good. You can keep them tomorrow as well. We're doing the wine tasting tour. You don't mind, do you?" I smiled faintly. "Of course not." He didn't even look up. "That's my mom," he said, and gave Bianca a proud smile, as if I were a loyal pet who'd just fetched a stick. The next morning at breakfast, Bianca was in full form. She'd managed to get the best table by the window, not because it was offered, but because she demanded it. "Excuse me," she called to a waiter, a young man barely 20. "This orange juice tastes like it came out of a carton." I asked for fresh squeezed. "Do you understand the difference?" "Yes, ma'am. I'll bring a new one straight away." "Well, do hurry," she added, glancing at her watch. "We've got a tea time at 11. I wanted to tell her to stop, to remind her that the people she ordered about were human beings, the same kind who once helped me keep my little guest house running. But I bit my tongue. I'd learned long ago that speaking only made things worse. I tried to speak to the children again. "Good morning, loves. Did you sleep well?" Zara gave a small shrug without looking up from her tablet. Bianca sighed dramatically. "Mom, don't fuss. You'll distract them. They've got a full day ahead." I nodded and stared down at my tea, the spoon trembling slightly as I stirred. Bianca took another sip of her juice, then turned to me as if remembering I existed. "Oh, and please, when you're with them by the pool, make sure you keep their sun hats on. Zara burns easily, and don't let them near the deep end. You know how nervous I get." "Yes, of course," I murmured. She smiled, that same perfect empty smile, and went back to her croissant. No one asked what I wanted to do that day. No one asked if I was tired or hungry. I was invisible, the silent nanny, the quiet shadow following behind to make sure their holiday stayed perfect. By the 3rd day, I'd stopped waiting for anyone to notice. I just folded towels, refilled water bottles, and smiled when spoken to. Because that's what the help does. By the 4th day, the resort felt more like a cage than a holiday. I'd become part of the background, another quiet fixture, like the palm trees or the poolside umbrellas. I smiled when people passed, nodded when spoken to, and tried to ignore the way Bianca's tone grew sharper with each passing hour. That afternoon, after dropping the children at the kids' club, I finally decided to take a walk on my own. The sun was soft and low, spilling gold across the glass balconies. The scent of salt and coconut oil lingered in the air. For the first time since we'd arrived, I allowed myself to breathe, to really breathe. I wandered past the bar area, past the line of cabanas that overlooked the sea. That's when I heard it. A familiar voice, light and sweet, but edged with cruelty. Bianca. At first I thought she was on the phone, but then I recognized Evan's laugh, that deep, careless chuckle that used to warm me when he was small. I froze. My heart began to pound, sharp and heavy in my chest. I took a step closer, slipping behind one of the tall palms, its leaves rustling in the breeze. The curtains of their cabana were half drawn, enough for me to see their silhouettes, Bianca reclining on the sunbed, a cocktail in hand, Evan sitting opposite her, sunglasses on, legs stretched out. Another couple sat with them, people I didn't know. "She's getting on, you know," Bianca was saying, her voice low but clear. 70 this year. Old people don't last forever, do they?" The woman beside her let out a little laugh. "Bianca, that's awful." Bianca shrugged. "I'm just being practical. Once she's gone, everything will be ours anyway. Evan's an only child, after all." The air left my lungs. I gripped the tree trunk to keep steady, my nails digging into the bark. The man's voice joined in. "Doesn't she have any money of her own?" Evan laughed. "My mum? Hardly. She's been living off her pension for years. We help her out when we can. She's not exactly flush." The lies hit me like a slap. My mouth went dry. Living off my pension? I had funded his business startup, covered their mortgage, paid the school fees for both his children. Every holiday they'd ever taken had been charged to my card, quietly, without them ever knowing. Bianca took another sip of her drink. "You'd think she'd be grateful, wouldn't you? But no, she's always hovering around, pretending she's still important. Yesterday she told the kids she owns hotels." She laughed, that sharp, hollow laugh I'd come to dread. Completely delusional. The others laughed too, even Evan. Something inside me cracked. I wanted to rush in, to scream, to tell them the truth, that the very sand beneath their sun loungers, the drinks in their glasses, the sheets they slept on, were mine. But I couldn't move. My body wouldn't let me. I heard Bianca again, softer this time. "I give her a few more years at best. And when she finally needs care, we'll just put her in one of those government homes. I'm not turning my house into a nursing home for an old woman." The woman gasped. "You wouldn't!" "Oh, I absolutely would," Bianca said breezily. "I've spent enough years pretending to care." My stomach twisted. I could barely stand. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. Then came Evan's voice. Calm, casual, cruel. "She's lucky we even brought her here. It keeps her busy with the kids. Free childcare, right?" They all laughed again. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The ache I'd been carrying for years hardened into something colder, something sharper. The woman they thought they were mocking wasn't weak or useless or a burden. She was the one who'd built the ground they stood on. I stepped back, my heart hammering. The sound of their laughter followed me down the path like a ghost. As I reached the end of the row of cabanas, the sky had started to turn pink. The sea shimmered quietly, unaware of the storm inside me. That was the moment I knew. The woman they thought they could break had finally had enough. That night I couldn't sleep. The laughter I'd heard by the cabana echoed through my head long after the lights went out. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. My son's careless grin, Bianca's painted smile. I kept asking myself how we'd got here, how the boy who once brought me daisy chains from the garden had grown into a man who could lie about me for the sake of pride. The room was silent except for the whisper of the sea outside. I sat by the window, staring at the waves as they folded over each other, endlessly breaking and beginning again. There was something comforting in that rhythm. A reminder that even the sea can start over, no matter how many times it's been broken. I thought about all the years I'd spent building other people's comfort, the guest houses, the hotels, the hundreds of rooms I'd poured my soul into, each one a sanctuary for someone else. I built homes, I whispered to myself, but I lost my own. It hit me then, sharper than any insult Bianca had ever thrown my way. I had been so busy holding everything together that I'd forgotten how to hold myself. I remembered the first time I'd opened that little guest house in Brighton. The wallpaper had been peeling, the windows stuck half shut, the bed second-hand and creaky. But I'd stood in that doorway, proud, believing it was the start of something good. I'd cleaned, repaired, painted, not just the walls, but my life. Brick by brick, I had built a future. And now, all these years later, I realized I still had that same strength. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was just buried under years of politeness, of quiet endurance, of hoping that love alone would be enough to change people who didn't want to change. Bianca thought I was invisible. Evan thought I was weak. But weakness doesn't build empires. Weakness doesn't raise children alone or fight banks or pay debts with your own hands bleeding. No, weakness had never been my story. As the night deepened, the tide came closer to the shore, brushing the sand in soft silver lines. I found myself smiling. A small, tired smile, but real. There was no rage left in me, not the kind that shouts or throws, just something steadier. A quiet kind of fire that doesn't burn to destroy, but to light the truth. I thought of Lena, the manager who'd recognized me the first day. She'd said nothing, but her eyes had asked a question. How long will you let them treat you like this? Now I had my answer. I stood, went to the desk, and picked up the phone. My hand trembled slightly, but my voice was clear. Lena, I said when she answered. It's me. Tomorrow morning I'll need to see you before breakfast. She didn't ask why. She just said softly, Of course, Mrs. Carter. When I hung up, I felt lighter. Not because the pain had gone, but because I'd finally decided to stop carrying it alone. I looked out to sea one last time. The first blush of dawn was already touching, the horizon pale and uncertain, like the start of a new page. Tomorrow, I whispered, things will change. Morning came calm and golden, the kind of morning that should have felt peaceful, but inside me, everything was electric. The air seemed sharper, the sound of the waves louder. Even the distant chatter of guests downstairs felt like the hum before a storm. I dressed carefully, not in designer clothes, not in anything fancy, just a cream linen blouse and the pearl earrings my husband had given me on our 10th anniversary. Small reminders of who I truly was before life buried me under other people's expectations. At 9 sharp, I called Lena again. Everything's ready, ma'am, she said quietly. Would you like me to come to your suite? No, I said. I'll go to them. The corridor outside was bright with morning light. My sandals clicked softly against the polished floor as I made my way towards their room. Every step echoed, calm but certain. I knocked once, then again. The door opened to Bianca, hair wrapped in a towel, robe tied loosely, her face still puffy from sleep. Oh, it's you, she said, eyes rolling slightly. We were just about to head to breakfast. The kids are starving. I need a word, I said evenly. Evan appeared behind her, fully dressed, phone in hand. Mom, can it wait? We've got plans today. No, I interrupted. It can't. Something in my tone made him stop. Bianca sighed loudly. Fine. Make it quick. I stepped inside. The air smelled of expensive perfume and sun lotion. Their suitcases were half open, clothes spilling out like carelessness made visible. I turned slowly to face them both. I overheard your little chat yesterday, I said quietly. By the cabanas. Bianca froze, her towel slipping slightly on her shoulder. You were eavesdropping on us? She hissed. I heard enough, I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Enough to know what you both really think of me. Enough to know what you've been saying to your friends. And to your children. Evan looked uneasy. Mom, you've got it all wrong. We were just... Stop. The single word cut through the room like a blade. Don't insult me with more lies. Bianca crossed her arms. You're being dramatic. We were just talking. It's not our fault you took it the wrong way. I smiled. Slow, cold, steady. You're right. It's not your fault that I took it the wrong way. It's your fault for thinking I was too stupid to notice, too small to matter. Evan's eyes darted around, looking for something to hold on to. Mom, please. I've spent years helping you, I said, my voice trembling now. Not from fear, but from anger kept too long inside. Paid your bills when you couldn't, covered your mortgage, sent your children to private school, and all this time you've been telling people I'm poor, delusional, a burden. How generous of you, Evan. How very kind. Bianca laughed, short and brittle. Oh, come off. You don't expect us to believe you own this place, do you? You can barely afford your rent. Before I could reply, there was a soft knock at the door. Lena stepped in, her posture perfectly straight, followed by 2 uniformed security staff. Mrs. Carter, Lena said respectfully, you asked to see me? Yes, I said. Thank you for coming. Bianca turned sharply. Why is security here? What's going on? Because, Lena said, her voice calm but firm, Mrs. Carter is the owner of this entire resort. In fact, she's the founder of the Silver Coast Group, 17 properties across the UK. The silence that followed was almost musical. Bianca's mouth fell open. You're joking. Lena looked at her coolly. I never joke about my employer. Evan blinked, as if the world had tilted. Mum, is that true? I handed him a folder I'd been carrying. Inside was a list of every transfer, every check, every payment I'd made for them over the last decade. The total at the bottom was enough to buy their entire house twice over. It's true, I said, every word of it. And now, you'll be settling your own bill this time. Bianca's face turned scarlet. You can't do that. Oh, but I can, I said softly. And I will. The spa treatments, the champagne dinners, the golf lessons, all of it will be charged to your card before checkout. I turned to Evan. And you, my dear boy, will manage without my help from now on. No more monthly transfers, no more mortgage payments, no more pretending you're supporting me while I fund your life. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, only a quiet, broken sound, half shame, half disbelief. Bianca's voice cracked. You can't just cut us off. We're family. Family, I repeated, a word that means nothing without respect. Lena cleared her throat gently. Shall I have their account adjusted, Mrs. Carter? Yes, I said, and arrange for their checkout tomorrow morning. As you wish. Lena nodded to the guards and left. The door clicked softly behind her. The silence in that room was heavier than anything I'd ever known. Bianca sank onto the bed, her face pale. Evan stood still, staring at the papers in his hand, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth. I took one last look at them, the son I'd raised, the woman he'd chosen, and felt an unexpected calm wash over me. You thought I was just the help, I said quietly. But I was the one who built the roof over your heads. Then I turned, opened the door, and walked out. For the first time in years, my footsteps sounded exactly like what they were. Free. I didn't look back. I could hear their voices behind me, hushed, frantic, tripping over excuses. But I'd stopped listening to excuses a long time ago. Downstairs, the lobby was alive with the quiet rhythm of the morning, guests checking out, luggage trolleys rolling across the marble, the faint scent of coffee and sea breeze. It all felt suddenly lighter, as if the walls themselves knew something had shifted. Lena met me by the reception desk, a folder in her hand. It's all been arranged, Mrs. Carter, she said softly. The charges have been moved to their card, every last item. I nodded. Thank you, Lena. See that their checkout runs smoothly tomorrow. No fuss, no spectacle, just order. Yes, ma'am. For the first time in years, I felt my spine straighten, my breath steady. Justice doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it's as quiet as a printed receipt sliding across a counter. I walked to the cafe at the corner of the lobby. The barista smiled, not knowing who I was, and asked, How do you take your tea? Strong, I said, and calm. While I waited, I watched the staff moving about, each one part of the family I'd built without even realizing it, the people who worked with pride because they were treated with respect. Something inside me warmed. I hadn't lost everything. I'd just been looking in the wrong direction. Later that afternoon, I saw Bianca and Evan in the lounge. Bianca's face was pale, her voice low as she argued with the front desk over the bill. Evan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. For once, he looked like the child I remembered. Not arrogant, not proud, just lost. When he noticed me, he opened his mouth as if to speak. I gave him a small shake of the head. There was nothing left to say. I walked past them without a word, my suitcase rolling quietly behind me. No anger, no triumph, just peace. Outside, the sea breeze caught my hair as I stepped onto the terrace. The horizon stretched out endlessly, the same horizon I'd chased all my life. Only now, it didn't feel like something far away. It felt like mine. Behind me, the sound of voices faded into the hum of the resort. Ahead, the waves whispered softly against the shore, each one erasing what had come before. I took a slow breath, letting it fill me. It wasn't revenge, it was balance. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt free. That evening, after the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I sat on the balcony of my suite with a pot of tea and watched the sea forgive the shore. The waves came and went as they always had, calm, patient, unbothered by the footprints that had trampled the sand earlier. I thought, perhaps that's what strength really is. Not the storm, but the tide that keeps returning no matter how many times it's pushed away. I poured myself another cup, the porcelain warm between my hands, and listened to the soft hum of the resort below. Somewhere in the kitchen, I could hear laughter, familiar, comforting. My staff, my people. For years I'd thought of them as employees, but now I realized they were the closest thing I had to a family, the kind that didn't measure love by money or appearances, but by simple decency and care. Lena came up briefly to check on me. "Everything's been settled," she said gently. "They'll be leaving in the morning." I nodded. "Thank you, Lena. You've done more than you know." She hesitated, then smiled. "We're proud to work for you, ma'am. We always have been." After she left, I stayed there for a long while, letting the night wrap itself around me. I thought about Evan and the boy he once was, the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to draw hearts on Mother's Day cards in crooked red crayon. Maybe one day he'd remember that boy too. Maybe not. But I was done carrying the weight of his choices. For the first time in decades, I felt light, as if someone had opened all the windows inside me. I'd spent a lifetime giving, forgiving, building, mending. And tonight, at 70 years old, I finally realized I didn't need anyone to give me worth. I already had it. Tomorrow, I'd go back to Brighton, to the small seaside flat I loved. I'd plant new roses on the balcony and name them after every woman who'd ever had to start again. The waves below whispered, steady and sure. And as I listened, I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I finally was. Sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing what's broken. Sometimes it comes from learning how to let go. And that, my friends, was how I found peace. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through remembering who I was before the world tried to tell me otherwise. I'd spent years believing that love meant keeping quiet, that kindness meant saying yes even when my heart said no. But now I know. True kindness starts with respecting yourself. Life has a strange way of teaching us lessons, doesn't it? Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it shouts so loudly you can't ignore it. For me, it came as laughter behind a curtain, cruel, careless. But it led me back to my own strength. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt overlooked, taken for granted, or made to feel small, please remember this. Your worth isn't something anyone else can give or take away. It's yours. It's always been yours. I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent for peace or spoken up for your dignity? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the light someone else needs tonight. Thank you for being here, and as always, take gentle care of yourself.